Hello, everyone. It's amazing to be here. Unfortunately, last year I couldn't make it, but I saw some of the recorded talks, amazing content, and this year the lineup looks as good or even better. So really looking forward to all the talks. So thank you very much to the organizers. Amazing job. So I want to give you a short 20 minutes on what might be the future of platforms. So it's sort of a aspirational talk, like for us to discuss some ideas of what happens if we apply this approach of platform as a product internally outside of engineering, right? In our organizations beyond engineering. I don't think I have to explain the book, right? But essentially, me and Matthew, our background is as software engineers and strongly influenced by DevOps. And so that means the book was written with the principles of loose coupling, internal cohesion, iterative change and discovery, attention to user needs, all these things that, in general, we are aware of within engineering for the most part. So the question is, what happens when we're talking to other parts of the organization where these principles and these ideas might not be as clear, right? And oftentimes, in the rest of the organization, there are many areas that are not aware of fast flow, right? If you know any accountants or lawyers or procurement folks who tell you, I really want fast flow, please come talk to me, because I don't know any of them. It's not something that is top of mind. And so what this means is that the way of working outside engineering has a direct or indirect impact on the flow of value to our customers, right? If you think about it, probably most of you have been in situations where, yes, we really would like to use this tool that would help us do our job in a much more efficient way and faster, or we would need some help from consulting to kind of innovate faster, and maybe the procurement process takes 6 months or a year sometimes, right? So that's not exactly fast or agile. And there are many examples I've had my share with customers as well, where maybe I remember one situation where I did about 5-6 hours workshop, and it took me 5-6 hours to upload my invoice to their portal and get it approved and eventually paid. So not the best sort of balance, right? So what I see, and maybe this resonates with many of you, is when we look, especially the larger the organization, there's this sort of abyss between engineering and many other areas. And this doesn't mean to say that engineering is and product on a higher ground. It just means maybe we're more willing to take a fall, and we're willing to experiment more with how we organize, how we develop our services, and so on, to be able to go faster, right? So I think what happens eventually when you have this sort of very different mindset is that if other parts of the organization are typically optimized for efficiency, for productivity, so they want to be able to have standard process for everything, for HR, legal, procurement, they're not making space for the situations where we actually need to discover how do we deal with this new situation so that we can still go fast when it's something new that we haven't faced before. And so if those other areas are not focused on flow, then typically you'll get to these sort of problems where teams feel like we don't have the autonomy to go faster, to make decisions, because we're blocked by these other parts of the organization. There are conflicts, frustration increases, and eventually people disengage from trying to improve the overall approach and processes. They're just, okay, it is what it is. If I need help, it's going to take 6 months at a minimum to get that sort of help. So not the best for fast flow, right? And again, we need to look at the context then of those other parts of the organization. Typically, they're incentivized and optimized for efficiency of their internal processes. But if you look at it, often that's lower value compared to what if we can solve new situations and new needs in a faster way, right? In situations that we have not experienced before. So we end up those departments, parts of the organization, end up optimizing for internal processes over higher value outcomes for the organization, for our customers. Or in other words, you are what you measure, right? So what's interesting, we need some shared understanding of fast flow, but if you look specifically at the platform as a product pattern, it really helps bring to light how can other parts of the organization work in this more fast flow focused approach, right? And remove this friction between typically engineering and product working in certain ways and organizing in certain ways that are very different from how the rest of the organization does the same. I'd like to come back to this definition of digital platform by Evan Butcher, because it sort of encompasses a lot of aspects. And in different contexts, you might highlight some of this more than others, but there's always this approach of we want to make the platform this internal product for other people in the organization in a self-service way, right? We're providing services to others in the organization. We're providing the knowledge and support around it so that it can actually onboard and use this platform effectively. And finally, we're providing this as a product. So we're trying to understand the user needs inside the organization. So outside of engineering, often what you might end up with is a platform which might be just a wiki, right? That has guidance, has maybe some examples, proper documentation that people can actually onboard, understand how to use this platform, right? It's not necessarily software-based services, but it could still be a platform, especially if it reduces cognitive load and improves the flow of the people consuming the platform, right? So I want to get more specific and give some examples of how this might look like. I'll explain the bananas in a minute. But let's say we want to have some sort of compliance as a platform if you're working in a highly regulated industry or you're building some services for a highly regulated industry. For example, it might look like this, where we have a sort of compliance platform, where we have a service to help search for regulations, figure out what kind of regulations apply to our context, to the thing we're trying to build for our customers. It might have another service for auditing that we can self-serve and sort of figure out, is our service, how compliant is it with the sort of regulations that apply, right? So if this thing can be provided in a way that the teams in engineering or other parts of the organization can consume and can figure out by themselves, at least to a large extent, is our service compliant or not, then we're in a good place, right? Turns out, from a conversation I had at the conference with someone that works actually in an organization that they do all this food labeling, therefore the bananas, right? So it turns out getting that little label on the package of the bananas, with the origin and what kind of, for other things, what kind of ingredients, all these things actually much more complicated than I ever expected. There's a lot of regulations around it. And so this person mentioned that they actually have an internal team that does these sort of services that you see here, right? They're trying to help the teams that are actually building the services to understand, okay, which regulations apply in which context, and then self-check if you're compliant. That was pretty cool. Let's look at another example. If we think about legal as a platform, does that even make sense? What could it look like? Well, typically you would expect to see, there's some common legal documents that maybe many teams are going to need to use to make agreements with external entities and things of that sort. So maybe it's more based on sort of the artifacts. Maybe we have a catalog for NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, for different contexts, different situations, and another catalog for statement of work and other types of contracts, right? And so this doesn't mean, and I would not recommend that the teams try to be experts in legal, but at least for common situations that they could self-serve and figure out, okay, which kind of agreements do we need to have in place to sign an agreement with this vendor or this contractor or what have you. Again, turns out some organizations are already doing this. In fact, with a customer, we had a sort of collaboration, and I was talking to one of the engineering teams, and I could see from the email thread, actually, that there was this links to the legal platform where they would pick up the NDAs and the other documents that were needed, right? So they basically were applying this idea to the legal department as well. And finally, what about leadership as a platform? If we're trying to change the mindset of leadership not being about defining the strategy and what every team should be working on to be aligned with the strategy, but actually a much more kind of bottom-up, how can we enable teams to figure out by themselves how to align to the organization's strategy and goals? Then it might look a bit like a platform, right? And so a couple of examples, again, we might have some strategy mirror boards or some other kind of artifact where teams can look at it and connect that sort of strategy. What are the goals of the company? What is, maybe what is the market? What are we trying to reach? And connect that to the work that the team is doing, the services that they're actually building. How does that align to the organizational strategy, rather than being a top-down, make it more kind of bottom-up. We enable teams to do that. And maybe we have some kind of metric service focused on the business. So again, that teams can figure out what should we be measuring? How do we know we're going in the right direction with the service or product that we're building? As you've seen the pattern by now, I've actually know a company, and I think several companies are trying to do this, but I know one in Norway called Capra Consulting, where they did this. Actually, the team that sort of runs this leadership platform is called Team Alignment. So they're basically trying to help teams self-serve and get better at aligning what they do, what they offer to the end customers, to the company strategy and the metrics that make sense. However, what I've also seen in these very early examples is when you don't have the right interactions between these sort of platforms and the teams consuming them, that's going to prevent the platform from evolving properly. It's not a platform is not something that it's, we do it once and it's going to run forever perfectly. It needs to constantly evolve, right? We know that, obviously, in engineering, but this applies to any kind of platform. So actually, in that example I gave about the legal as a platform, turned out that this customer, this was sort of a collaboration sort of thing, they didn't have an NDA that would work for us. So it was a new context, was a new situation. And unfortunately, the legal platform team, if you like, or group, was not really open to expand the platform and figure out, okay, this is a new situation, what do we do now? They would revert to, okay, then we need to go through the 3 months or 6 months process to get this agreements in place, right? So that was a problem. We should not assume that platform can be consumed forever and that it's in ideal state. It's always going to need to evolve. So in fact, what they should have been doing is, okay, here's a situation where we need to collaborate with this other teams to figure out what is new, what is different about this scenario, this context, so we can evolve the platform. And finally, I wanted to share some ideas, some starting points where how to help us sort of play well together in the sense of having a shared understanding of why these platforms help with fast flow, what are some of these sort of patterns and principles to make this type of platforms work, right? Because it's usually, that's where the problem is. It's not the initial definition of the platform and the services, actually, how is this going to evolve and how do we keep it in a state that helps our internal users? So I'll give you some ideas. It's not meant to be a full list, and Possibly in your organization, there might be other sort of principles you want to adopt. But in general, the first one would be we want to prioritize fast flow of value to our end customers, right? Over optimizing internal processes and standardization, right? If that goes against faster value to the customers, then we need to prioritize that first. Second principle is to unblock others through curated self-service patterns. Again, this is something that needs to continuously evolve. We need to figure out what are those self-service patterns. We need to identify problems where, well, actually we thought this was easy to understand, to onboard people, but no one really gets it. So we need to go back and improve documentation or improve the onboarding so people figure out how to use this, how to find the right contracts or how to find the regulations they need, etc. Number 3, the platform should be open to change, right? We need to collaborate to discover new needs and how do we solve them. If it's closed, if it has very rigid boundaries, then eventually, sooner or later, it's not going to be as usable and helpful anymore. Number 4, we need to optimize for adoption discoverability. If we have this great platform, whether it's software-based services or a wiki, if no one knows about it or people don't have easy access, then there's no good in having that kind of great platform if no one really can find it and use it. And number 5, we should be looking at enabling others by meeting them where they are today. And it's something interesting, sort of my own evolution of my thinking after the book, I think aligned with Matthew as well, is that platform groups end up having to do a fair amount of enabling as well, right? They are the experts in that platform domain. They need to help teams sort of onboard, and they need to understand different teams have a different background, they have different needs, so not everyone's going to be able to, say, start or onboard on a legal platform and figure out what they need without guidance, right? That's where the knowledge and support around the platform comes in as well. And this, I believe, is even more critical when we're talking about this sort of new ideas of legal as a platform, compliance as a platform. A lot of the teams that might want to use those platforms won't have the necessary background, so they're going to need help and guidance from the platform group that's running those kind of approaches. And finally, something that we might want to do in our organization is maybe have some sort of platform manifesto that works across engineering and other parts of the organization, legal, HR, whoever is sort of on board to adopt this platform as a product approach, right? Again, just an example, something that we might be thinking for organizations is, we should value teams and interactions over tools and functionality. Obviously, we need both, but when we need to prioritize, that's what our focus should be on. Adoption and engagement over mandates and standards. Rich customer experience, internal customer as well, over technical prowess. Being open to change and collaborate to discover user needs. Unblocking internal customers through the self-service patterns. And aiming for superlinear impact with sublinear growth. And by the way, that last one is from Paul Ingalls, CTO at Uswitch. I'm not clever enough to come up with this nice sounding phrase, but it gives us an idea of the power of platforms if we do it right with these sort of principles and mindset. And again, maybe in your organization there are other principles that you would want to have in this sort of manifesto, but it's a way to bring people from different areas together and sort of share the same kind of approach. And I really believe and start to see that organizations that have really been able to increase flow in engineering and product, the more we are able to do that, the more we're going to see the impact of the rest of the organization not being aligned to these ideas of fast flow, of platform as a product, and so on. right? So what I would like to ask from you is, next time you see this sort of, you have this image in your head and you see, okay, these people in this other department don't really understand these ideas, try to start building that bridge and explain a bit why fast flow matters, why should we be looking at more effective ways to provide value internally to other parts of the organization, right? It's going to take a while, but I do believe that we can get to better outcomes by having people, different departments, more aligned to these ideas of fast flow. Before I go, I'll be around for the whole day, looking forward to hallway conversations, and me and Matthew will be doing a book signing on this first coffee break in the morning at the Team Topologies stand. So it's a bring your own book approach, I have to say, but Agile Stationery has Team Topologies books if you need. And yeah, looking forward to all the conversations and talks. Thank you very much.